that point. I don't feel like I was off the track there.
No, I don't think you were.
But as my investigation went on, I felt like the Dow Tex building became the center of something. I believe that the book depository was where our attention was supposed to be drawn to. Okay, anyway, with the focus on the word tailor, would it be unreasonable to make an assumption that a dress manufacturer, a tailor might know a dress manufacturer?
I think that's a pretty good assumption. Mm-hmm.
Okay, based on that, I looked it up. Now, Arlen Specter's dad was an immigrant from Ukraine, and according to Wikipedia, he was a tailor and a junkyard man, okay?
Okay, that's interesting.
Now, I tried all day long to connect Mr. Zapruder and Arlen Specter's father. I couldn't do it, but here's what I could come up with. Arlen Specter's father immigrated to New York in 1911. Mr. Zapruder immigrated in 1920 to New York.
Okay.
Mr. Zapruder went to work in a dress factory cutting patterns for dresses.
Okay.
And Arlen Specter's father, I'm not sure exactly, but they say he was a tailor and a junkyard man. But it was in New York. So it is possible that they knew each other.
Well, guess what?
What?
Arlen Specter and his family, Arlen Specter grew up in Kansas. So that means that his father moved to Kansas and took the family there. I think Arlen Specter was actually born in Kansas, in the same town, I believe, where Senator Bob Dole grew up. And Kansas, I'm here to tell you, ain't far from Texas.
Yeah, but still, that doesn't. I couldn't make a direct link. You know.
Well, you know, Bob. I'll tell you what. You know something?
What?
I actually think you might be onto something.
You do?
I do. I don't know where.
That's why I'm telling you, Mike.
I don't know where the connection can be made, but you know, it's funny. I had an interesting conversation about Arlen Specter just this afternoon, so it's kind of ironic that you bring him up. And you know, the late Gary Ween insisted that Arlen Specter had. You know, everybody knows Arlen Specter came up with the magic bullet theory for the Warren Commission.
Well, that's why I tried to connect them.
But you know, Gary Ween went so far as to allege that Arlen Specter may have actually been involved in the pre-planning of the JFK assassination. Now, I never saw, Gary died a few years ago, and I never saw him actually, I never saw any evidence that he had of that. But, you know, like I say, I'm not prepared to write off anything, and, you know, the fact is, if you look into this JFK thing, most of the people either involved in what I believe to be the actual planning of the assassination, and then those we know who were definitely involved in the cover-up, they were all interconnected in one way or the other. It was a very small, select group of people, very closely connected.
Okay. Mike, I just need to know that you'll give me a teeny... I just want to say two last things to tie up, to finish up, okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right, this is not actually... I'm getting off the Taylor thing, but... you know, Ukraine kept coming up all over. The Prime Minister of Israel at this time was from Ukraine, okay? Anyway.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, his name was Eshkol.
I didn't know he was from Ukraine.
He was from the Ukraine, all right?
Okay.
And what I learned was the garment district in New York, there's an awful lot of Ukrainian Jewish people in the garment district. That kept coming up in my search. In fact, I began to realize how important the garment industry is in this world in general, and what they can do if they're, depending on what they're doing. So, you know...
Every time there's a war, they stand to make a lot of money.
Well, I'm talking about hiding in plain sight type stuff.
Well, that makes sense, too.
You talked about that waiter. Remember the waiter? You know, he had
You're right, exactly.
He had to have that uniform to become that waiter. Okay?
Good point. Okay.
Well, anyway, getting off of that point, I just want to say two last things.
Go ahead.
One, a couple days ago I said that, you know, when you design something, you always have design goals. And some goals have to be met, others don't have to be met, but you wish they would met. Well, in this one, I told you the other day that I'm pretty sure one of the design goals was that Oswald had to die.
Mm-hmm.
Because he ended up dead. okay, even on national TV. But you know what? Another design goal had to have been Kennedy had to die.
Right.
Whoever did this could not have had a wounded Kennedy.
That's right.
He had to die, okay? Now, once you factor that in to a design goal, you know there had to be a shooter on the grassy knoll, because they wouldn't have placed all of their eggs in a shot far away, okay?
That's right.
Because he could have fallen down like he did. He didn't stay upright.
Right, exactly.
And if they needed to make sure he was dead, they had to have somebody on the grassy knoll.
Absolutely.
And I wouldn't be surprised if they had somebody on the overpass, okay?
Yeah, it's very, very likely. My old friends, the Collier brothers, were of the opinion, and I think a lot of other people are too, that there may have been an assassin up there by the overpass, looking out of a. There was like a sewage thing, which a very small man, could go down into after firing a shot. So that's a very good possibility.
Well, the point is, once you decide that if that was an absolute that had to happen, then I believe someone was on the grassy knoll, and there's other proof for that, but I won't go into that. And finally, even if nobody believes anything that I've said about my personal investigation on what happened here, the one thing you have to accept, it's not an unreasonable possibility, okay? When you add up all the things, it's a definite possibility of what could have happened, especially when you know that Kennedy was trying to stop Israel's nuclear bomb program, okay?
That's right, absolutely.
But if you go into the Warren Commission report and the second Kennedy report, the second report on this that the Congress did,
right,
you will see absolutely none, zilch, no mention at all of such an obvious path that needed to be investigated, right?
Well, because they weren't really seriously trying to investigate it.
Well, the point I'm trying to make is this: either our FBI and CIA aren't very good and couldn't figure this out, or two, it was intentionally omitted. Okay? Now, I remembered when O.J. Simpson, remember when he took flight?
Right.
They say that flight was evidence of guilt.
Right.
Well, I think that omission of such an obvious path of investigation has to be evidence of something on the part of our government. Okay.
Right. They were fleeing, but they were fleeing in the opposite direction of the truth.
Their omission is evidence of something, and what it's evidence of is not good. And I guess that's where I will leave it.
All right, Bob. I appreciate your call. A lot of good thoughts there. I appreciate that, Bob.
Okay.
All right. We'll be talking to you.
Bye.
All right. Let's go to Ron in Oklahoma. Ron, what do you have to say about anything?
Well, I'm very irked at you guys for spending so much time on something that happened so long ago. It reminds me of the Jews focusing on the Holocaust 65 years later and just running it into the ground. I mean, with all the things that are going on now, you really have time to spend a half an hour talking to some kid from Texas about his theories about tailors and all this nonsense?
Well, you know, Ron, I tell you, it's kind of funny you call and say that, because I thought you were the one that had told me that I should spend time on this program reading excerpts from my books.
I do, Michael, but your most important books and the things, you know, well,
go ahead.
Well, I think one of the most valuable things that you do is bringing to people's attention books that they ought to read. You talked about the Super Mob, the book about Sidney Korshak the other day, and you said, you know, you stayed up until 3 o'clock reading it, and I thought, whoa, I've got to go get this book. So I go zipping down to Borders as soon as your program was over, tried to find the damn thing, and lo and behold, I couldn't find it. Well, the reason I couldn't find it is because Borders has it in the fiction section, and I don't think that that's an accident. And so, but at any rate, I finally found it, and you are absolutely right. It's the most outstanding thing I have ever read, and anybody who's listening to this program, if you have not read the book Super Mob about Sidney Korshak, you have got to go get it, because that sucker, tells it all. It tells you exactly how the Jewish underground works, why it is that they have so much power and nobody knows about it. And this book just lays it out like nothing I've ever seen before. Don't you agree?
Oh, I mean, it's an incredible book. I picked it up again. I picked it up again just over the weekend here because I want to write a review of it for American Free Press.
Oh, great!
It's such an enormous book with so much information in that when I sat down, I just really didn't know where to start. And I want to emphasize again. I'm glad you brought it up, Ron. This other book, which is very parallel in many ways, by Roger Morris, Morris. It's called The Money and the Power. It's Sally Denton and Roger Morris. I think they were married, but they're divorced now. Her name is Zenton. His name is Morris. Roger Morris, The Money and the Power. It's a history of Las Vegas, and it overlaps in many ways with this book, Super Mob, but covers the whole history of Las Vegas and frankly says that everything about the things going on in Las Vegas directly tied into the establishment of the State of Israel, the rise of the Lansky crime syndicate, the rise of Ronald Reagan,
really,
all of the things that we talk about here in this program and everything that we read about in the daily papers. So it's another book that it's available in the bookstores and worth getting hands on.
There's another one that's equally compelling is Red Mafia. Have you read that one?
Yes, by
Robert Friedman.
Yeah.
And, it's very interesting, too, that, Friedman was, because he was Jewish, people were claiming that he was a self-hating Jew and that supposedly there was a contract out, and then he died of very mysterious circumstances.
Yeah, he died of, the official story is that he picked up some bizarre jungle fever, literally.
Yeah,
yeah, and died, and his name incidentally is spelled Friedman, Friedman.
Right.
And the book is Red Mafia, but Mafia is spelled, I believe, Mafia.
Right.
Yeah, that's a very good
Russian
book.
And that one is a heck of a sequel to Super Mob because that picks up the modern-day Russian Jews that are coming into the United States and doing their mob thing on the East Coast and Florida and all that. There's another book. It's an older one by Hank Messick.
Hank Messick.
Messick, called Lansky.
Absolutely.
And that's almost, I think you ought to start out with the Lansky book because it sort of sets the deal, and then go to Super Mob, and then read Red Mafia, and boy, by the time you're finished with those suckers, if you don't have a clue as to who's running this country, why, and how, then, you don't have a clue.
Yeah, in fact, that book, the book I mentioned by Roger Morris, points out that the Democratic political machines that pushed Adlai Stevenson into the Democratic presidential nomination in '52 were all, although, the image of is these small-town politicians, the point are these big city Democratic politicians. In each of those cases, those big city Democratic machines were controlled by Jewish organized crime interests, not the mafia.
And I think, right, and when you say mafia, we usually think of the Italians, but that's by design.
Exactly.
It's as the Korshak book points out, it's the 3 M's. It's the Jews are the mind, the Italians are the muscle, and they're both linked by money. And the Jews' whole thing is to stay below the radar, where the Italians, with their macho thing, they want to get out there in front and have everybody, so it works perfectly for both of those groups. But it's the Jews that are really running the show.
You got your finger on it. I'm sorry to tell you.
And another thing that you just, you brought up there about the Korshak book also points out that, hey, they got both parties. There's, people say that there's no difference between the Republicans and the Democrats, blah, 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 blah. Well, read this book and you'll see why. It's because they got their hands in everybody's pocket.